Late.
All right. Welcome to the WEBRTC working group meeting. This is June 17th, 2025. The group abides by the W3C IPR policy and patent policy. Only companies listed as working group members are allowed to make substantive contributions. Only people of companies listed as members are allowed to make substantive contributions to the specs. Next slide. So this is the June meeting. We have an upcoming meeting. Next meeting is July 15th, and there is no meeting in August. Next slide. Here's a link to all our meeting info and latest drafts. And Dom has already volunteered to scribe for the first hour. Thank you, Dom. And the meeting is recorded. So next slide, please. Please follow the W3C Code of Conduct. And we're all passionate and improving WEBRTC, but let's all keep it cordial and professional. Next slide. So we're using the Google Meet raise hand tool to get onto speaker queue. And we've done this before, hopefully. So next slide. Document status. Posting under a W3C repo by itself does not imply adoption by the working group. Adoption requires a call for adoption on the mailing list. Edited drafts may not represent WG consensus, but generally drafts that are published should, once they're confirmed by call for consensus on the mailing list. All right, next slide. So issues for today, we have some screen capture extensions from ALOD, WEBRTC PC from Tim, and some encoder transform from UN, and media capture output from UN. And with that, let's get going. This is ALOD. You're up. You're muted, Elad, if you're talking.
Thank you. Guido pressed it, so I didn't know. But okay, thank you so much. So I'm Elad. I'm here from Google, and basically I'm going to be talking about two separate topics. This is the first one, and it is basically the issue that currently, if the user interacts with getDisplayMedia's prompt and cancels the prompt, or rejects the prompt, we get an error, and that error is not distinguishable from other errors. So let me get going. So just the usual reminder, we've got a function called getDisplayMedia, and if the web application calls it, then the user agent is going to prompt the user to choose a tab, a window, or a screen to share. And it's always possible to share nothing, right? You can click cancel, you can click no, you can click take me out of here. You can also just close the application. All of these are valid options, right? And that's one way that the user can explicitly reject the prompt. But additionally, it could be that the prompt just fails for some reason, right? The user agent can automatically reject, the operating system can reject, there could be missing permissions. And when that happens, the spec says that we have to return a DOM exception called not allowed error. I'm sorry, I don't remember if it's DOM exception or DOM error. I can check it in a second. It's a DOM exception. And the DOM exception has to have the name not allowed error, and then there is a message which is kind of, unspecified. And I'm choosing Safari here because it's very good. It says the request is not allowed by the user agent or the platform in the current context, possibly because the user denied permission. And that is a very correct explanation of what happens, and note the word possibly here. And, it's a bit of a shame because we can't tell which one it was. And just to clarify, not picking on Safari here, Firefox and Chrome, very similar messages, right? And that's an issue because this could happen when the user rejects the prompt, when the user agent rejects the prompt, with the platform, etc. We've just covered all of this. So I want to convince you guys that actually there is one type of exception that we want to distinguish from all of the rest. Specifically when the user explicitly rejects the prompt. And I want to give a couple of examples here of why we might want to actually distinguish that. So first, let's ask ourselves, when would the user even cancel a prompt, right? Obviously, if it's a if it's a malicious application, it could be that the user has never done anything to indicate that they want to share their screen, and they're just alarmed to see the prompt, and of course they're going to click cancel, and that's great. But in the context of a well-being application, right, that is correctly structured. So for example, any video conferencing tool you might have used, there's probably a button that's labeled share, share something, and you click that. But even when you do that, you might still click cancel because maybe you changed your mind last moment, right? Like maybe I was just about to present and suddenly Yanivar says something. I'm like, oh, okay, let Yanivar finish his thought first. And then I only click that again, right? So that's not an error. I probably shouldn't have telemetry as an error in that case. And I should probably not inform the user that, hey, you've just clicked cancel, right? Like the application should probably just be non-verbose in that case, should just keep quiet. But it could be that if this happens for an individual user, okay, maybe you just want to be quiet. So that's one reason to distinguish that from actual errors. If this happens, at scale, there is reason for concern, right? So maybe an application, a sophisticated application, tries rolling out new UX, and it follows. It basically tracks. Harald, you might want to mute yourself. So it basically tracks, overall changes to user behavior patterns, right? And if suddenly you see that a lot of users, start rejecting the prompt, that could teach you that, hey, maybe your new UX is unclear, maybe buttons are too close together, right? Like maybe the user, just fat finger click the wrong thing. So it's kind of good to know that for that reason too. So 2 reasons of why you would want that. So my proposal is simple, right? I'm saying, hey, the mechanism is not terribly important, but what we need to do is A, applications need to be able to distinguish explicit rejection from everything else. B, the mechanism should be specified in a compatible way. So for example, right now, Chrome can very easily just change the message. In fact, we have, and applications could rely on that, but that's not ideal, right? And C, if possible, it's better if the mechanism is backwards compatible, right? So for example, we probably want to keep the name not allowed, just in order to not break existing applications that rely on that. That one is, debatable, but I propose that. So to that end, my proposal is, let's just follow the example set forth by over-constrained error, where we just subclass DOM exception. We keep the error name as not allowed error, okay? But applications that are interested can just check the prototype. So example code would be, when you catch the error, you check, hey, is this error defined? And if so, is this error a subclass of explicit user rejection error? Yes, Yanivar.
Oh, sorry, I want to get on the queue. I don't know if you're taking questions now or at the end.
Okay,
But,
no worries, you're very close. So basically the idea is that in this way, if I'm not mistaken, it could be that I'm mistaken, maybe we should check the prototype instead and check, particular strings. I had it on my backlog to actually test this right before, but I forgot. But I think this would yield, backwards compatible code that would allow you in a safe way to check whether it's explicit user rejection or not. And Yanivar.
Yes, thank you. So yes, I think this is a valid use case to solve. I think provided we want to make sure that all the browsers implement transient activation so that there's reasonable, that when the user will only see this prompt when they click a button or click something. And in that case, I believe Firefox already, we have this, we return not allowed, we have not allowed error, of course, but we also return not found error if there's an OS limitation. Similar for camera and microphone, we do that as well. However, I believe if we're in an iframe and there's a permission policy limitation, I think it's not allowed error. So I agree that there's probably some new things needed here. If you go back 2 slides, I had a question. Here, there's a read-only attribute called constraint. I'm wondering if that's a mistake.
Sorry, yeah, it is a mistake. I just, I went into DevTools, I edited the name, and I didn't look past it. Thank you for catching that.
Yes, but this goes to my point of we stay here. I think we would just want to discourage checking on the interface type.
Okay.
And I think normally I think so far the rule has been that we extend DOM exception in order to add attributes. So if we could add an attribute that was called user initiated or something, I think that would be preferable to checking on the instance of.
Absolutely. I agree. So basically, the application would check like, hey, is there a field called user initiated, and is it also a Boolean set to true? And possibly
Yes.
you can do this with the single line. So yeah, I'm for it.
All right, cool.
Yes, Yuan?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether we cannot use already permissions API to fix to know this basically currently.
You could.
Because, for instance, with permission API, you can know whether the user persistently denied access. If you're in an iframe, it's persistent as well, and there's no way you can fix it. So knowing whether user persistently denied or whether you are in iframe, I don't think we need to expose that. It seems like it's not useful for user, but maybe it is. So what I'm wondering, like looking at the issue and the use cases, it seems that with a mixture of not found error and permissions API checking, we are basically we should get the information.
No, sorry.
So yeah.
Just a second. One topic at a time. Like we have discussed this particular topic, and I would like. So thank you for reminding me of the question. Please allow me to remind you of the answer. You cannot use permissions API for that because it's asynchronous and because it is specified that the permission should always be asked. So if I click once, right, and I get prompted once, regardless of whether I say yes or no, the next time the permission should still be asked or prompt, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. And number two, because it's asynchronous, there is a small chance that things would change.
So let's say the user in the settings said, I want to always deny get display media because that's what I want. I don't want to be bothered by prompts. In that case, after get display media is called, you will not get asked. You will get denied.
In that
so you know,
one edge case,
you know that it's not the user that rejected the prompt by clicking cancel. You know that, basically.
That's one edge case. First of all, I don't think we have a mechanism for that right now, either in the spec or in any implementation that I am familiar with. And even if so, it's an open question whether you want to expose it to the application. Like maybe the application should not know that the user went and, you know, pre-configured that. And regardless, even if this particular edge case is handled, like that's an edge case, like the majority of cases is just like a user that has never interacted, you know, with that setting, just goes on a meeting, potentially for the first time, potentially for the 100th time, right? They click get something that will invoke get display media, and they change their mind last moment and click escape, press escape. And you just need to know, you know, that moment, like it's not, if you prompt the permissions API, that's going to be asynchronous. You need to know what happened before. So that's the only truly correct way of doing it, is to get the answer of like this particular call was rejected by the user.
So there's the same kind of issue for get user media, and so far there hasn't been requests for get user media, because for get user media you can click on something and say, oh, actually I don't want to use camera, so I will deny. And
that's a separate
case. We haven't received requests so far there. So I wonder what is specific about screen share for that specific use case.
Yes.
We can extend it to get user media, I understand that, but what is making a camera different from screen share here?
So what's making different between the user, get user media and get display media is that get display media will always, no matter how many times you call it, even if it's millions of times, will always involve a new prompt. Okay, so it doesn't make sense. Like there is no state in between, right? So you only care about what happened with that particular call. With get user media, that's persistent, depending on the user agent and its decisions, either for that one session or for all eternity, and also like you can more easily imagine a user changing their mind about, oh, I won't share right now, and then 5 minutes pass and then they want to start sharing it, because that's part of the normal way that a video call evolves, right? Whereas if you click, I don't want to share my camera, that's not something that users typically interact with multiple times during a video call. Like right now, if my next slot were not immediately after the current one, I would probably relinquish, the screen sharing to Guido. Guido would handle it for a few, and then, it's like in 50 minutes, I would be screen sharing again, and I would get a new prompt. And all this time, the permission will be prompt. And if in between I start screen sharing again and click cancel because it's not the moment yet, like Guido is going on for 2 more minutes, right? I need the mechanism to know that the user clicked escape.
I will let others talk, but I'm not seeing a big difference between camera and screen share here, basically.
There is the fact that it's asynchronous, right? Like you need to know what happened with that particular invocation, not with prior invocations or invocations that happened in between. So it makes sense. Like it doesn't make sense for you to get an error and then do an asynchronous call that would tell you what that particular error meant, right? You are in possession of an error. You need to be able to synchronously know what that error means that moment.
All right, I see Harald on the queue.
Yes.
And just, oh, come on, there you are. And just points that your previous slide listed 3 different reasons why it could fail. So obviously, the string, the attribute needs not to be Boolean, it needs to be a string. And attribute that tells you exactly what happened. I mean, the user denied or internal failure or the OS decided you are not allowed to ask this question.
I have tried to pitch this particular approach to the working group in the past with mute reasons and other reasons. This did not normally work well. So what I'm trying to address here is to say there is this one issue. I want to address just that. I want to pick that one, get it, separated from the herd of possible issues. And in the future, we can pick other things and give them distinct names, distinct subclasses, distinct values. But right now, I'm only seeking to address one of them.
Okay, I am sorry for being optimistic.
That's okay. That's a common mistake.
Anyone?
So I think we should solve this use case, but I think what Yuan brings up is interesting. So I don't think, I think if we can solve it one way or the other, I don't have a strong opinion. I think, so the 3 reasons I heard was the user rejected their prompt.
That's the only reason. I'm sorry. There are.
Yeah.
I disagree. I very humbly disagree with Harald on this. I'm only talking about one particular case that needs to be separated from all of the rest.
But so the other ones is basically the browser rejected the prompt, which I think Yuan is correct that it sounds reasonable to me that if you use permissions query, you should get denied. That should be reflected as denied. I don't know if that's true in implementations. And we should help the spec say that if we want to go that way.
It's always ask because you can always ask again. You can always call the display me again and get
not if the browser rejected the prompt, right?
No, regardless.
It depends. I mean, I guess if you configure the user agent to always deny, I guess in that case you could return deny.
But there is no part of the spec that says that you should. Like even if the user agent being pre-programmed to reject is not in the spec.
Last question from Tim, and we are past schedule. So
it's okay. It's my time. I'm willing to donate more. I'm the next slot too.
Let me finish my point though. So if I see 2 solutions there, Elad solution and UN solution, let's call it that. For UN solution, we would have to
make some assumptions. Call here. You would have to make an asynchronous call here, whereas here you get it synchronously.
Not necessarily, because permissions, the permission spec lets you add a handler, so you can actually track the state over time. So you can already know the state by the time you need to make this decision.
I don't understand how that would work. Like I'm gonna.
You can track it and cache it whenever it changes.
I can track it and cache it, but it happens like the user only rejects after they see the prompt. So I'm gonna await.
It's true that some browsers might even try to not leak the denied state until there's been an attempt. So yeah, but I think this could be solved basically.
No,
if we want to. I'm not saying it's zero work, but I see two directions here. The question I would have.
I don't think you can do it synchronously.
Let me finish my point though. So.
How would you do, like, if you want to, if the normal behavior, which is always asked, because you can always call it again, how will it be denied, and then when it will become asked again? So immediately after one fails, it's still asked, because if you call again, you will be prompted again.
The way it would have to work in order to work, this is the Steelman, is that if the user rejected the prompt, you get not allowed error, and you check permissions query and you get prompt. That means the user rejected a prompt. That assumes, of course, that all other cases, the browser rejects the prompt, the OS rejects the prompt, iframe allow permissions are not, iframe is not allowed. All these things have to reduce down to permission query being denied. If we can get there, that's all I'm saying, then that seems like
I don't think so.
Work.
So
Or not
you will
valid error,
notice,
or different error.
you will notice that there is a catch, and then there is if else. And normally the pattern here would be if, else if, else if, else if. The normal pattern is that when you receive an error, you examine the error type and you handle it appropriately. The pattern is not that you register handlers ahead of time, cache the state, and then, if you get one error, you do one thing, otherwise you check the cached value. Like the simplest, most straightforward, most idiomatic way is to encapsulate the type of error in the error object.
Yes, agree. I mean, that is the simplest, but it begs the question whether if it's just because it's simplest doesn't mean if it is solvable another way without adding a new API, that it still might be worth something.
I argue that
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the little amount of time that it calls to type. I mean, we have asynchronous APIs. I'm not sure that's by itself isn't enough reason.
We have Tim on the call. I guess we can ask Tim to discuss, and then we really need to move on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I'm not convinced that the examples you gave of how you would deal with this error need to be synchronous. You talked about collecting statistics. You talked about not popping up further dialogues to inform the user, and both of those things can perfectly well be asynchronous. So I don't see a hard requirement for it to be synchronous. I can see that it's simpler to write the code that way, but I think
I can give you an answer.
I don't see a hard example. Well, you didn't give a hard example.
I can give you one. What would you expect to happen with the button? Like, assume that you call get display media from the handler of a button. Okay? So do you tell me that now after the button clicked, most likely you want to await something, you want an interim state where, the user has clicked the button once, I've already received an error, I don't know what the error is yet, so I will not re-enable this button. First, I'll do an asynchronous operation in order to determine the error type, and only then would I re-enable the button. Sure, you could do that. Is that a nice way of structuring your application?
I don't see that as a hard requirement for it being synchronous. It's maybe tidier code-wise, but I don't see it as a hard requirement.
One more question. What happens if I do it correctly, but another application does not? What happens if we now say, the right way to determine you need an asynchronous call in order to determine the result, but an application that called get display media twice in a row might not handle it correctly. So it's not exactly the least foot-gunny way of doing that, right? Like we should just make it that simple for the application to do it.
I think you need to focus on that argument rather than it having to be synchronous. I think you need to focus on the simplicity rather than the synchronousness.
I think I've mentioned that argument. We've got two more people on the queue.
Harold.
So I thought you said, I might have misunderstood, but you said that when after the call, the permission will still be prompt.
Yes.
Which means that, of course, the handler for a change in the permission state will not be called because it doesn't change. So that
You're
means
absolutely
that,
correct.
Unless I've misunderstood something, Yuen's suggestion won't work.
It really it depends, but we can discuss it on GitHub. But basically, if the settings are denied always, then it will be called.
Yes, but as I mentioned,
and query will return denied. Yeah.
And you've mentioned that.
And
but
if there's an issue, then maybe it will be not found error, and instead of not allowed error, and so on. So we could try on GitHub to list the exact list of details and of use cases, and then see which ones can be addressed and which ones cannot be addressed, for instance.
Yes, but you and I've responded to that, and I said that yes, in this one contrived example, it works. But what about the normal example, the non-contrived case of like the user just pressed escape? It's not actually like because it got auto rejected. It is because the user clicked escape. There is no current way for you to determine that.
So what I'm saying is that the way would be that if permission query is still prompt, then you're good. But as Yanivar said, we need to be sure that the other cases can be distinguishable from that. And that's what I was trying to say that we can discuss on GitHub.
Okay. I say that. Let's move on to the next topic because otherwise we won't. Or do you want to say what you want?
Just a very short one. I think the synchronous asynchronous issue. I think the info is more about what you will do. What you will do can be asynchronous, but for correctness, you have to check synchronously because otherwise you will be checking a value that is afterwards. So that's only the point that I want to check. This has to be synchronous for correctness of the check. The action to be taken can be asynchronous. Yeah.
Yes.
Just for a solution, then I'm hearing a lot of agreement that this is a use case that we should solve. So we'll go and get up and solve it and discuss further.
Yes, it's issue 321, if I'm not mistaken. I'll just mention that even if we were to, just for the sake of argument, agree that there is one more way of doing it, I have still not heard a reason for why we should not go with the simple way. And the way that is more correct, more simple, and at least I favor this, and I think Yanivar too. Like, could we have just a vibe check here? Like, Yanivar, which approach would you prefer?
Well, I think if I wasn't fully aware of UN's approach, but I think that is promising. If that can turn out to be the case that we can always tell from denied, I think there might be ways. We can still also delay the promise, remember, for the get display media itself. There might be ways to ensure that you will get denied in all the cases, so you could tell prompt. So, but that's something we have to write down because I agree that the spec is too vague right now.
All right, thank you very much. So everybody's opinions hopefully are reflected in the minutes. Thank you so much. I'll just jump on to the next thing. I've got 10 minutes less than otherwise. So I'm going to try to speak a bit faster. So thank you very much for the previous session. Thank you very much for your attention in the current session. I'm going to be talking about exposing the overlaps between the window that is capturing an application and the window that is being captured in the case that you are capturing a window. So just a little bit of, definitions here. I want to define the word overlap. Hopefully it's self-evident, but it's going to be even more self-evident after defined. So on the right side, we've got a mock here where I'm using a, Meet. Meet runs inside of a window, a browser window. And you see that I'm sharing another window. It happens to be another Meet window, but it could have been anything, right? Sorry, in this case, I actually made the mistake of sharing a tab for the mock, but imagine that I'm sharing a window, okay? And you see that these two windows, one of them covers the other. And there's both overlap in terms of maybe some of the browser window itself overlaps and also some of the content area overlaps. So if we just reduce this to two windows, there's an overlap between the windows, and then we've got a diagram of this on the left side. And you will see more diagrams in the slides to come, so please have something like this in mind when interpreting those diagrams. Any questions so far, or are the diagrams clear? Okay. So what is the state of the art? Again, we assume that an application call gets display media, but now let's only talk about the cases where the user chooses to share a window, and that window happens to be another window, not the application's own window, which is also a possibility, right? In that case, which window will be in the foreground? So the user agent could, or could not, focus the captured window and bring it to the forefront, to the foreground, right? It could be that the OS media picker, like in the case of macOS, might actually already do that, right? Like maybe part of actually choosing the other window involves bringing it to the foreground or not. It depends on the platform. And web applications can actually affect this behavior by giving a hint by calling set focus behavior, which is something the user agent is not compelled to respect, but it might. So Chrome, for example, implements this. And another question is like, okay, so we've got focus is one decision that is kind of shared between all of those entities as you start sharing a window. And the application might also want to trigger picture-in-picture mode, yes or no, right? Just clarification, if I say pip, going forward, I mean picture-in-picture mode. So I want us to look at 3 different examples, okay? Now I apologize for the recursion here because you're using Meet and you're seeing mocks that are gonna use Meet. You guys have seen this before and you will manage to figure it out. So in this case, you're seeing Visual Studio Code, right? That's the application that I'm sharing. And you're not seeing Meet, it's completely obscured by whatever I'm sharing, but because Meet, in this case, right? But it could be any video conferencing application, because Meet chose to trigger pip, we've got pip still allowing the user to interact with the call, and it's on top of that window. Okay, that's one example. And in this case, the fact that pip was triggered was helpful. Another example is if we've got side-by-side windows, right? So the left half of the screen, you see Meet. It's a little bit confusing because there's also a preview of what I'm sharing. But if you kind of look at it at the top of it, you will see that all of it is actually a Chrome window, right? So you've got a video conferencing application on the left side and whatever you're capturing on the right side, and there is no overlap. So first of all, whether you bring something to the foreground or not is not as interesting. It's still interesting for keyboard focus, but the user can still mostly interact with both. And it's completely useless to trigger pip because here's the next slide. If you were to trigger pip, pip has, first of all, is not giving you access to any new information. And in fact, it kind of obscures something, right? So let's look again. One case. Case number 1, your own application is completely obscured by whatever you're capturing. You probably want to trigger pip. Case 2, applications are side by side. You do not wish to trigger pip. And if you were to trigger pip, it would actually be disruptive to the user. Okay, so what's the issue? The issue is that the application cannot make an informed decision here because it does not know whether it's in one situation, right, complete overlap, complete obscuring, or the other one, completely side by side, or in any of the other ones. And, the main possibilities here are you can be obscured by, you can be obscuring, you could be side by side, or you could have a partial overlap. So having this information basically drives better decision making by the web application. So the user agent can make a better decision about using the hint to focus and triggering pip. And in the future, maybe we can, employ this additional information by future APIs. So I've got 2 proposals, 2 possible proposals that I would like us to consider. Proposal number 1 is to just expose the number of pixels, and then we expose all 3, right? We expose in the capturing applications window. That's information that we almost have, right? Because the application knows roughly its own size, but it doesn't know the user agent window. So we get that. Then we also get the number of pixels in whatever you're capturing. That's something you already have. You can compute that from width, height, and screen pixel ratio, okay? And then we also expose the number of pixels in the overlap, okay? And if you want it in percentage, you can always just convert it. It's a simple conversion, as I've shown here, modulo bugs that I might have because I've never run it. So, okay, that's one option. And then you might ask, wait a second, why do we need to expose 3 different numbers? One of them already exists in some other form. And can we not just expose the percentage of the overlap? And that would be a fine question if you were to ask it. My answer would be that it's not enough because you could be in all sorts of cases, right? The overlap could be very small, but the windows themselves, yes, Ewan?
Yeah, in your example where the pip is going to capture the application, it seems the web application want to know that. So they will want to know what is the current situation and what is the situation if going to PIP, right?
So just to clarify, PIP is something that you trigger after. The application is in the main window, right? So you've got the main window,
Yeah.
and then
So,
you're starting to capture another window, and now you want to know whether PIP would be useful based on the relative situation of the main window and whatever you're capturing. PIP has not been triggered yet.
yeah, but what I'm saying is that if you trigger PIP, there might be some overlap. That's what your example, the second example you have given, where the PIP is overlap is on top of the capture. And
that is,
I guess you would want to know the kind of information you are describing here, if before the PIP and after the PIP, or am I missing something?
I will touch on that briefly with proposition number 2, not proposition, sorry, proposal number 2. So I'll get back to that, and if you feel like I've not answered it sufficiently, let me know. But I just want to clarify that PIP is just one possible way to use this information. And it's true that, yeah, if you're going to trigger PIP, it's useful to know where the PIP is going to be. But assume for a second that you don't even know where it's going to be. Like, the basic question is, like, does PIP even have a chance of being useful, right? Because if I'm in the extreme example where the original window is completely visible, there is just no need for PIP, right? Because the original window itself is already, superior to PIP. It's like it has everything PIP would have and more. So we at least want to distinguish this edge case of like side by side from this edge case of, hey, complete matching. Both windows are completely maximized, both the one that you're capturing as well as the one that does the capturing. But I'll get back to that. So tell you what, this, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one, but we can get back to that if the question arises. So option number 1 was like, hey, let's expose the number of pixels in all 3 entities and let the application make its informed choice. Option number 2 is to say, hey, let's just expose the actual bounding boxes, right? So we know exactly where everything stands, and then the application, it's trivial for the application to compute the actual number of pixels, and it has more information, so it can even drive a more sophisticated decision in this case. And in this case, this would also tie into what Johannes just mentioned of like, hey, if I'm going to trigger a PIP, I might know if the PIP is going to obscure whatever I'm capturing, and maybe with some future APIs, I could even hint to the user agent to place the PIP correctly so that it would not obscure whatever I'm sharing. But then again, maybe the user agent can just do it automatically, right? So all discussions that we can have. I'm almost close to relinquishing the mic here. I'll just say this approach is more flexible. I would definitely prefer it. I would imagine that you would have some concerns about privacy, etc. I don't know if there are very, significant concerns, but I would imagine that we would have to have some discussion here. My own suggestion would be to go with number 1, which is simpler and solves the issue. Just a second, Jennifer, I'll just bring it to home. One open question that we might have is whether values that we expose, regardless of which approach we take, do we only expose the initial values at the time that capture started, or do we keep them dynamically? Do we keep updating? That's a discussion we need to have. We only have 9 minutes and already people on the queue. So just wanted to mention that this is the agenda. Yes.
So just first a disclaimer that Mozilla still has an open position on document picture-in-picture, but I'm not going to let that, I'm not going to block on that here because I think this would work with any PIP. So I think the use case is good and that we should solve it. I had some questions. If you go back to possibility, yeah, here at the bottom here it says the overlap as a percentage of either capturing or capture surface is not enough. We need to know both. So here you have 2 values. If you go back 1 slide, here you have overlap percentage of capture and overlap percentage of captured. As but that's an algorithm from 2 other values. So you have 4 values instead of 2.
Yes.
Which seemed excessive to me, and I think I would push for maybe just exposing the percentages. What would you lose from that?
The percentages are the thing about exposing just the percentages is that you are actually exposing the pixels. You're just making it cumbersome for the application to get them, because you already have the resolution, right? Like you've got the width, height, and screen pixel ratio. So with some mathematics, you can determine the actual pixel size of the captured window. And once you have that,
Yes.
then you can also, and you've got all of the percentages, then you can get the pixel size of all of them. So it seems easier to just expose the absolute values immediately, not really showing any more information than otherwise. And it will be just more ergonomic for the application to go in one direction than in the inverse direction.
But on the flip side, we could expose less attributes here, and you could still determine the rest of the information is sort of polyfillable. So you could, that argument swings both ways, right?
I agree, and this would not be a blocking concern for me. I personally think that, you know, it's gonna be trivial for us to do it once than for web applications to do it continuously, and we would probably also, we only need to get it right once, and you know, web developers need to get it right every single time. But you know, if this is important for you, I would not block on this.
Okay, and I don't see anyone else on the queue. So my second concern was with the last slide about this being dynamic. Like, I think there's a reason for this. If I understand the use case correctly, the main use case is when it starts, right? When capture is starting.
That's the time where I currently have, you know, decisions in mind that an application might want to do.
Yes, and I think you can make a good case for that because it's the browser that's actually causing disruption in the user's depth of windows. And to get some information of how that went, I think it seems pretty safe since we're already, the browser's already involved. I'm concerned if we were to change this to be an updated value over time, I worry that can lead to the browser basically fighting with the user. If the browser is moving a window to be occluded, they may have a good reason for it.
This is read-only, so there is not going to be fighting. It's more that you are exposing this.
Yes, but you could then create a pip that would follow the user around maybe and interfere with.
You cannot control.
I still have to make sure the user is in charge of their window depths and all those things. And
we agree. We agree that we don't. We are in full agreement that, you know, we shouldn't allow a web application to fight the user. I just think that this concern is not correct right now. It's not valid because there is no mechanism for the application to move the pip around. And if ever there were, that would already be a problem in its own, because if you're sharing the screen, then the application can already programmatically determine where the, you know, where the pip is, which is not the case we're talking about because we're talking about sharing a window. But you understand, like, being able to programmatically move the pip around without the user's interaction would be a problem on its own that would allow the application to fight the user. So I don't expect that we would ever do that. But then again, I'm not an editor of that spec.
right, but you also haven't, I believe you haven't proposed any APIs to fire an event or update this information either. So I think at the table right now, it sounds like I agree. If we can start with at the time of open, I think that would be a good place to start, maybe.
So first of all, I'm completely okay with that. I'll just give you one, you know, counter example of why you might not want it. And that is, you could imagine an application that maybe surfaces a button of click here to pip, and they only do it when they determine that, hey, you know, the positioning is such. So you could imagine that, okay, maybe you start side by side. It doesn't offer you, though, it doesn't automatically call pip. It doesn't offer you that. After a while, you've managed your windows a bit, and suddenly you go back to the application. They're like, hey, you seem to be, you know, switching between whatever you're sharing and this a lot. And it looks like because it's this overlap, would you like to click here to pip? And that would require transient activation. So I could imagine a case where an application would want this information. We don't have a concrete use case for, like, we have this hypothetical use case. It's not a practical, it's not a concrete one right now. Or it's not real, it's hypothetical. It's concrete, but it's hypothetical. Sorry, these are the words I'm looking for.
But there is some risk of tracking the user's movements and manipulation of windows that are out of scope for.
Yes, but you know, so that's where if you only expose number one, right? Like you're exposing very little, because all you find out is that there is an overlap forming and unforming, but you're already capturing that window. So its resizes is something that you already observe, right? Like we already know that the exact pixel values are determinable from width, height, and screen pixel ratio. So you're not getting anything new there. All you're getting, and you can also observe the changes in your own, bounding box of the application itself. So that's already something that you know. And then, this overlap doesn't sound like it leaks too much if it's dynamic.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah, as long as I think we can agree to start, maybe, and then maybe come back to, we still need to discuss how these values update over time, I think, if at all.
In that case, do we want to
see.
Half a second, just before I move it to Tim? Maybe in that case, does that mean that you would support controller.initial overlap pixels, controller.initial, etc.?
I think initial percentage.
Oh,
I would support that.
awesome. Dominic, if you could just make sure the minutes reflect this will be awesome. Thank you so much.
Tim is in the queue too.
Yeah, I'm not too bothered about the privacy implications. I don't see anything for the moment that it leaks that you couldn't already work out, particularly given that you can, you've already captured it, provided this only happens after you've already captured that window. I don't think there's anything. I mean, in like you could do some AI process and work out what the overlap was as well, probably, just by looking at the pixels.
No, that's when you share the screen. We're talking about when you share a window, in which case that information is not available, because you will always be getting all of the captured window regardless of the intersection.
Okay, but to my main point, which is I'm not too bothered about the privacy, because I think you know most of it anyway.
I agree. Yuan? Sorry, is it okay if we go just 2 minutes over time?
Yeah, I just mentioned, I'm wondering whether, like, percentage, that seems fine. I'm wondering whether just hints to the user agent saying would be sufficient. So it would be good if there was an issue that was filed on GitHub, and maybe like some explanation of how you use the percentage, like is it like 50% and so on? Because sometimes you have the organization of an application that is very different, and what you're obscuring is very important, like the menus, they might be here or they might be there and so on. And so I'm wondering whether hints and the user agent could not do a better job. It's the usual question there, I guess.
I can answer that. So thank you. So I can answer that. So in the edges, we know what we want to do, right? Like some applications want to not trigger pip if the overlap is 0, and if it's 100%, they definitely want to trigger pip. But in between is kind of difficult, right? Like, and you don't.
I'm not talking about pip. Pip to me is a bit of a side cases, and it's actually not the right case. The right case is, do you want to focus on the capturee or the capturer? That's the thing, I guess, this data could be used.
But that's the beauty of this current approach, is that you allow the web application to either set focus behavior or trigger pip or do multiple different things based on this one information. Whereas a hint, you might need different hints for different behaviors.
Then maybe we need to identify which use case you have in mind, because I understand pip, but I don't think this is solved in pip, and I understand set focus behavior, and I understand that it's fixed. It's probably a good solution for set focus behavior. If you have other use cases, it would be nice to know them ahead of time.
The main one for me is pip, and so for me, like anything that does not solve pip is not the MVP.
Well, okay, just to clarify, I think Elad means pip is the remedy that he would apply to an overlap problem, not and I think Ewan might be talking about when the pip itself is overlapping something. So those are two different things.
The pip itself overlapping or potentially overlapping once triggered is a separate issue that I would like to address as a follow-up, or actually probably leave it to other people to follow in my footsteps one day. The MVP right now is to not trigger the PIP when it's disruptive, and to trigger it when it's 100% helpful, and to leave it to the application to experiment with what, partial over. If you could just mute, thank you. To experiment with, hey, where's the threshold in between? Because, we are not going to have consensus about the threshold between, multiple video conferencing applications, and it's not fair for one of them to kind of dictate to everybody else just by virtue of committing to an open source browser a bit more. So I think it's best if that is left to the web application and is not a heuristic employed by the browser itself.
Okay,
We need to move on with the agenda, but I guess hints could be used as well there. So it's worth exploring a little bit or discuss.
If the hint is a percentage, then yes, but it does limit future heuristics because you might get more information in the future and then you could, apply multiple heuristics all at once. I've run out of time. Thank you very much for the next person for involuntary donation of time.
Elad, will you be raising an issue to continue discussion on this? Or?
I think there's already an issue, but if not, I will, right, this one does not have. Yes, the other one was 3-1. This one I will file an issue. I will do it after my 2 months vacation that I started yesterday, actually. So please be patient.
And I'm hearing agreement on use case. Is that correct?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Right, and there we go. Is this going to work? No, I've got the wrong focus. There we go. No, hang on. Is somebody else driving this? I'm confused now.
I am.
Okay, cool. You drive it. That's great. You drive it, and I will.
No, it's not me.
No, it's me. I'm driving the slides.
Okay, let me close this then. Let me stop sharing screen. There we go. All right, driving. So yeah, Firefox has fixed the bug I filed 8 years ago. And implemented get fingerprints on RTC certificate. And thanks for that. I do appreciate it. What it's useful for is verifying a known peer on reconnection. So you reconnect after some point in time, and you can tell that the peer is still the same peer as it was last time, without having to trust much else. And you can think of it as like real-time, the zero RTT thing in Quick. It's just like allows you to do something without consulting a remote key store because you've already talked to them before. So the question then is, and you're assuming that talking before was done in some way that satisfied a security guarantee that you were worried about. In some out of band or verified or whatever. So point being now, how can you check subsequent connections? So next slide, please. So first thing you're going to have to do is to find out what the remote fingerprint is. And you might think that DTLS transport will tell you that. Well, it won't in 2 ways. One of which is it gives you an X509 on get remote certificates rather than a fingerprint. And anyway, Firefox doesn't implement it, so it doesn't help us there. And the third point, and probably the more important point, is it's too late because by the time you've got a DTLS transport in a state where you can do get remote certificates, you've already connected to what you think might be a hostile pair. So it's not very long presentation, Peter. So maybe we can queue up questions unless it's really urgent.
No, you can go on.
Cool. You can run a fingerprint algo over the X509, but then you're doing crypto in JS and you're assuming that it's the same algorithm and whatever. So next slide, please. So we're assuming that somehow you can get a remote fingerprint, and it is in the STP offer answer, so you can just pull it out of that, using a bit of STP manipulation. But of course, there are multiple fingerprint lines, so you might not get the right one, or you might interpret it incorrectly. And anyway, we're kind of trying to get rid of digging in the STP. So next slide, please. So let's assume that somehow we've got it. What can we do with that knowledge? And you want to do is check it against the previous one. So you could do a string compare, and then drop the peer connection if it doesn't match. And again, you'd have to like dig in the SDP to find it probably, but like you could do that. And then the other thing you could do is to replace the fingerprint with that's arrived in the remote answer, presumably, and replace it with the one that you were expecting. And then what will happen is the DTLS handshake will fail because it doesn't match, which is cryptographically much more interesting and a stronger way of doing it, but it results in you editing. It requires you to edit the SDP. Or, of course, you can do both of the above. You can check it before and after, but that's kind of belt and braces approach, possibly unnecessary, but not terribly useful, maybe. Next slide, please. So what we'd really like, and what I'm hoping you're going to say yes to, is do we need an API point to avoid us having to dive into the SDP, either to read from it or to set into it? And I'm hoping the answer is yes to this, and we'll find out in a minute whether it's no, but let's assume for the moment that it's yes. Next slide. Yeah, so if we're going to do that, then if we're going to provide an API point, then I've come up with 5 ones, none of which is like necessarily definitive, but all interesting, I think. We can say set the remote expected fingerprint as part of the peer connection setup, so that it's got to happen before you do the full offer answer. So it's got to be fairly early on. So you could do it in as part of a peer connection, kind of immediately after new. Or you could set what you expect to be the remote certificate, which has the advantage that you were able to get it with get remote certificate on the previous version and store it in IndexedDB or something. But it has the disadvantage of being a bit ugly as an API. Then the next option would be to say that it's a config field on peer connection. It's an optional config field on peer connection. So you can say remote fingerprint will be, and then a fingerprint as part of your new peer connection call. Or you could say when you've got a remote session description, you could have a property on it, which is a fingerprint. So you could inspect that and maybe even set it before you call set remote. And then the fifth thing would be to say, well, it's a setter and a getter rather than a property, and that would allow you to throw errors and stuff like that. I'm open to other suggestions. I'm not wedded to any of these at all, but I kind of like A best so far, but I'm happy to be convinced by others. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, that's the kind of end of discussion, but let's start talking. What do people think? Peter.
Yeah, can you go back to the slide about get remote certificates? Yeah, this one. Does get remote certificates not return an RTC certificate? Or
no, it returns a blob. It returns a binary blob.
Can we just?
I thought it would
that?
return a certificate, but it doesn't.
It seems like it would be reasonable to fix that so it returns a certificate, so you could call get fingerprint on the value returned. So that seems like something we could change, or get certificates too, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, except that certificates have got this weird behavior of not being like there is limited things you can do with them, like you can't view them, for example.
But you just want to be able to call get fingerprint on it,
right? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a useful addition. It would be a nice way to do it, but yeah.
But you said C is your main problem, and I would like to know what do you mean by already connected? Because, for example, ICE is already connected. DTLS, the handshake is almost done. Are you mainly worried about the SCTP handshake happening, or potentially RTP packets coming in? Because you don't have to send anything until you want. I'm just wondered. I wonder what you're worried about it being too late.
If you look at a whole bunch of the zero bugs that were thrown up a couple of years ago, they were all about receiving RTP that you weren't expecting earlier than you were expecting it. And so I'm kind of loath to, I'm keen to not have a connection up if you don't want it. If it's not a connection you were expecting, then I'd be keen to reject it before you exchange any packets. Because by the time get remote certificates has a valid value, the DTLS handshake has already finished. And the SCTP handshake is probably finished.
So, I mean, they aren't great, but there are alternatives, right? Where you could set up a send only RTP transceiver and then switch it to send receive after you've verified the certificate, or you could not do the SCTP handshake until after. So there are ways around that, but they're not. They aren't great. I'll admit that.
And you're still talking to somebody who is like almost by definition hostile. Like if they're not who they say they are, then you have to assume that either it's a bug or they're hostile. And so like letting the upper layers filter what they do is when there's the option to just drop them completely on the floor I think is a weaker option. I think if we can like kill them immediately is like what you want to do.
Right. What I'm trying to say is you can achieve the same thing right now with the existing APIs. It's just not straightforward. So you're basically trying to make it easier.
No, I think you can't. I think you still have like if this would protect you against a malicious SCTP init ACK.
Right, but you don't have to do SCTP until after.
Yeah, you can't not. You've got no option. Like it's going to happen. In the browser, you can't. There's nothing you can do. I'm saying
don't negotiate SCTP and the SDP until after you're happy with the DTLS fingerprint.
Okay,
I'm not saying it's straightforward. I'm saying it's possible.
And now you're adding. So you add a round trip on the.
No, you don't have to do it on the wire. You can do it just locally.
Okay, right.
Like I said,
this is almost as ugly as the other solution, which is to edit the SDP.
Sure. I'm saying all these things are possible. You're just trying to make it easier.
I'm trying to make a proper API for it. We've got an API. I mean, so, the backstory here is that this API was designed for doing the get fingerprint was there for doing IDP, and the IDP never happened. And so we're left with something of an orphan that I'm trying to make some use of.
Right. I think I understand where you're coming from. So I don't want to take up more of your time. I just want to leave my comment on the what if we add an API.
All right.
So can you go back to that slide? The one that's like the options. Can you go to the slide with the options?
I don't have control, so whoever's moving the slides.
Whoever's driving.
One more, keep going. One more.
Okay, here. So I like the idea of D. I think a lot of people parse the SDP just to get the fingerprint, and I think we should actually throw in the ICE UFrag and password too. But we would only be able to do that if it's fully bundled, unless we start getting complicated object model thingy. And similarly, for all your other options, you're going to run into the issue of it will only be supported if you have max bundle, because otherwise you have to worry about per transceiver stuff.
Right.
And in the case of setting an expected fingerprint, you're not allowing for multiple fingerprints. You're only allowing one.
I think before we go into API bike shedding, I think we should drain the queue.
All right. Well, that was my last bit. So
okay.
Harold.
So this is the wrong level, because fingerprints are a transport attribute, not a connection attribute. And furthermore, I don't understand the API thing here, because the fingerprint is what the other guy tells you, so that, or someone representing the other guy tells you, so that you can verify that who the other guy is. If you invent the value and push it down, you're saying that you know the certificate of the other guy better than the guy who is trying to set up a connection to you. And that kind of makes no sense to me. So I don't understand the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
And anyway, it's a transport level thing. It belongs on DTLS transport if it belongs anywhere.
So the problem we're trying to solve is persistence. Like if you've got two devices that talk to each other and you've established a trust relationship between them in some relatively complicated way, some relatively expensive way, and then they store each other's certificates, you can then subsequently, when they talk to each other next, you can skip the relatively expensive verification because you know they both got the certificates as last time. So
Well,
it's a
in that case,
persistence.
they have the same fingerprint.
Yes, they have the same fingerprint as last time.
Yes. Are you setting them up using SDP or not?
Am I setting the finger?
Are you configuring the pair connection using SDP or not?
Well, inevitably, you always do.
Yes. And in that case, the other guy will say, hey, I still have the same fingerprint.
Yeah, and the DTLS handshake will fail. That's my point about adding the DTLS handshake. The DTLS handshake will fail because the fingerprint doesn't match the one that the certificate that they're sending.
As long as he's using the same certificate, he will have the same fingerprint.
Yes, if he's using the same certificate, then he's got the same certificate and he's the same person.
Yes, and if
Right.
if he sends you something else,
Yes.
I mean, if he sends you something else in the SDP, that means he wants you to talk to some other person. If he sends you the same thing in the SDP, you're talking to the same person, and then the fingerprint is the same. I don't understand why you need to change it.
So let me piggyback maybe on what Harald's saying, if that's okay. I'm confused about the use case because you said the other part might be malicious, but why would they have your certificate?
They wouldn't have. No, I'm explained this badly. So let's imagine we have a device. We have two users who are out in an environment where they can't necessarily reach a public key store, but they have already spoken. They've already connected in the past, and as part of that, they did they recorded each of them recorded the other person's fingerprint and stored it in IndexedDB. And now they use a relatively untrusted connection mechanism to exchange SDP, but they can verify that they're still who they were when they were using the highly trusted mechanism the first time by looking at the fingerprints and saying, well, hey, this is still the same person. The far end still owns the same certificate as they did when we used the trusted exchange. And so you can verify that they are still the same instance of a browser, essentially, or the same instance of a baby monitor, or the same instance of a camera, or whatever it is. And so it's about being able to use what might have been a relatively expensive trust exchange in the past, trust on first use or whatever, and then pull it into the future in exactly the same way, well, not in a similar way to the way that quick zero RTT restarts works, is that it knows that you've got the same certificates and therefore you don't have to do as much setup.
So the least expensive way to do that would be to compare the fingerprint from the cheap SDP exchange with the fingerprints from the expensive SDP exchange. If they're the same, you have the same other guy.
And that's exactly what this API lets you do.
I mean, it's what will happen. I mean, if you generate SDP twice using the same certificate,
Yes.
no matter what the transmission mechanism is, the fingerprint will be the same because you're using the same certificate.
Yes, but if the thing you're coping with is the fact that the signaling mechanism is less trusted, and so the signaling mechanism might rewrite that or it might introduce somebody else. So, and even if, and here's the key point, even if, so you're saying, assume that they don't have the same fingerprint, but I think they should have, right? How would I test that?
Yep. So let me check the spec where you have get fingerprint.
I can tell you the only place is on a certificate.
Yep.
Just
So,
to say
yes.
that we start to be slightly over time.
Yeah.
We can give a few more minutes. My advice would be to file a GitHub issue if there's none done anyway, so that we can continue after this meeting.
Okay. Yeah. So Yanivar, you had a question.
Yeah, if we look at option C here, new peer connection, remote fingerprint, are you sharing local certificates with multiple peers? Because I don't understand what
No.
you expect. And it seems like a redundant mechanism if you expect another failure path for test. You already have the ability to add in a custom certificate to the peer connection object. So now you would be providing that and the remote fingerprint, which seems redundant to me.
No,
That's my
because the ability to you can set the local certificate. You can't set the remote certificate.
So what do you need?
There's no API point for setting either what you get or what you expect from the remote end.
But
It seems redundant though.
You don't have
the
to
local
set what-
certificate. Go ahead, Peter.
You don't have to set what you expect if you can check what you get before calling set offer or set answer. Set
Right.
remote on. Set
Right.
remote. So D is sufficient modulo bundle.
So Peter, maybe if you understand what I'm talking about, you could explain it a different way, and because I've obviously done a bad job on it.
Basically, you're saying you'd want to make sure there's no processing of SCTP or RTP on the receiving end until the JavaScript can somehow verify that the remote fingerprint is trusted or known or a certain value.
Yeah.
But
And you
when
can
would-
do that. You can do that by parsing the STP right now or by other hackery that I mentioned, but you want to avoid parsing STP.
But when would you not trust it? Wouldn't DTLS fail?
No, DTLS succeeds, and then it gives you the fingerprint that it succeeded with, and then immediately
You
it
don't trust
starts.
it.
Immediately it starts the SCTP handshake, and it starts processing incoming RTP, unless you do things to avoid that, which is what I mentioned. But those are annoying and hard to do.
I think we will have to continue on the
Sure,
GitHub
yeah.
issue because we're 10 minutes over time. So,
Okay, will do.
so go ahead.
Yeah, so let's talk about encoded transform. Yeah, next slide. So we are exploring actively, a bunch of us, how to better integrate S-frame in in the web, basically, and in particular S-frame packetization. So currently, you can use script transform to do S-frame to encrypt it with S-frame, but then you need to pretend that it's VP8, VP9, 364, blah blah blah. And so that's a bit in a violation of the expectation that the script transform is actually sticking to regular VP8, VP9 content. So we think that there's a need somehow to say that S-frame needs to be part of the SDP negotiation, saying, hey, I want to use S-frame between sender and receiver. So we came up with the idea of having in the SDP a transceiver, like per end section, we would say, hey, use S-frame, basically. It could be either per frame or per packet, and I will come back later on that. So the current SDP proposal currently is this one. It's per transceiver, there's no impact on codec negotiation, and it applies to all media payload types. Next slide. So with script transform, we have a per frame processing, meaning that you get the frame coming from the encoder, whatever it is, and then you apply S-frame, and then you give it to the packetizer. And the packetizer should know that, hey, I'm getting S-frame, so I will do the generation of packets based on this S-frame blob. That's the model that is compatible with script transform. The second model, which is implemented by in WebEx by Cisco, is to do per packet processing. So the encoder is giving a regular 264 frame to a packetizer that generates 264 packets, and then the payload of the packets are each individually encrypted with a frame. So both approaches have their own advantages. So the current desire is to support both modes. So both a mode that would be compatible with script transform and a mode that would be compatible with per packet individual S-frame processing. Next slide. So the first question we could ask is, as a web API, how can we enable S-frames? So we are creating an offer and we're adding a transceiver and blah, 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 and then we get the FTP and we are sending it to the other side. So how to enable S-frame with our APIs? So the current approach that is being proposed is to set an S-frame transform as sender or receiver. So basically, you create a transceiver, and then you set sender the transform or receiver the transform equal new S-frame transform, and at that point, the S-frame is actually negotiated. Once S-frame packetization is negotiated for a transceiver, so it should apply to both receiver and sender. Packets are sent if and only if sender has an S-frame transform, and similarly, packets are processed if and only if receiver has an S-frame transform. Otherwise, packets frames are dropped. There's a case of you started to get packets without S-frame, and you want to go to S-frame, or the reverse. It is not being discussed here, but this is something that we should also discuss at some point. One approach could be that you stick to S-frame whenever S-frame is being negotiated, for instance. So this decision, I guess, will be done at the IETF level. But from a web API perspective, I guess we could, this transform equal new S-frame transform approach could work probably well. Next slide. So let's say that you want to do S-frame with S-frame transform, that's fine. But we also have script transform, and script transform could do both S-frame processing at the frame level and other stuff, like some manipulation of the content itself. So we could add a way to state that script transform will be considered as an S-frame transform. So the possibility here, it's an API proposal, is to add an RTP script transform options object, and you would pass it as part of a constructor to RTP script transform. Then, if you do that, it means that you mandate script transform to be considered as an S-frame transform, which means that it needs to produce S-frame content and it needs to receive S-frame content. In practice, it would mean that it would use the S-frame packetizer and would only receive content from the S-frame depacketizer. That would be restricted to the per frame mode. I don't think that currently there's a plan to support the per packet mode with script transform. We could look at that in the future, but it might be a bit difficult. Next slide. Yeah, Yanivar?
Well, I guess I would wondering about why that would be difficult. Is it on the receiver side?
Script transform is getting an RTC encoded frame as input and writing an RTC encoded frame. And in the packet mode, you're taking a packet, you're encrypting the content, and you're writing a packet. So if we would have a script transform at the packet level, meaning I intercept the packet, I change it, and I write it, then it would be the right hook. If we go back to slide 40, the orange lines are where script transform is, and the green lines are where the per packet processing, like the Cisco S-frame processing, is happening. And currently we have a hook for the orange lines, but we do not have any GS hooks for the green lines.
Yes, but so the script transform would happen in the orange parts, and the S-frame would happen in the green parts. But I don't think it matters much where the switch is, right? You could still have a switch on the script transform. The problem we're solving there is that you can't specify both an S-frame transform and a script transform, right? There's a couple of ways to do that.
Yeah, that's another possibility. Yeah, to like, if we wanted to have both script transform and S-frame transform at the packet level, we could do something like that, right? What I'm meaning is that the script transform itself could not do the S-frame transform on the packet payloads.
Well, I think are we confusing JavaScript objects from underneath? I mean, the problem you're solving, I think, as I understand it, is you want script transform as well. You want S-frame transform and script transform.
Not really here. Like, the question I was pointed at is, can we have a script transform that would be compatible with Cisco? Like, we have a Cisco sender and we have a receiver. Can the receiver use script transform to do the decryption and so on? And currently, we consider it out of scope, basically. If you want to do that, you would need to use S-frame transform, and that's fine.
Well, I don't see that. That seems artificial limitation to me, but maybe we can discuss it later, because I think the use cases are different. For script transform, you want to add metadata, for example, and for you wouldn't use it for encryption with S-frame, because you would do S-frame, do the encryption at the packet level and decryption, and then you would do some frame manipulation before sending, and before packetizing and after depacketizing. And it doesn't seem like in conflict to me.
Sure, I could see S-frame processing being done at the packet level and wanting to do frame level manipulation using script transform. But I'm not talking about that. I'm really talking about script transform trying to do per packet transformation. And that is out of scope currently in here.
Well, it's possible we're talking past each other, so maybe we can pick it up later.
Okay. Then going back to slide 42. Yeah. So 41 maybe. Yes. So yeah, 42. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, if you want to do S-frame processing at the frame level, script transform is okay to use. That's what people are doing currently, and it is nice that you would use the per frame processing encryption done by script transform, but using the S-frame packetization itself. And these new RTC RTP script transform options would be a way for the user agent to know that the script transform data should be packetized using S-frame packetization format. Next slide. So now going to the S-frame transform object. S-frame setup and error handling is implemented by JS code. So typically, when you set up, you want to say, hey, I'm using S-frame. You want to provide keys. You want to react to errors. Oh, there's an error there. I need to change the keys or I need to change something. I need to set up the right cipher suite as well and so on. So all of that is really generic. Whether per frame or per packet, you don't really care. It's mostly a detail there. So the proposal here is to use S-frame transform for both the per packet and per frame processing. But you still need to instruct the S-frame transform that whether they should apply to frames or to packets. So I thought a bit about it and I thought, hey, we have two options there. The straightforward option is to add a parameter to the S-frame transform constructor saying, hey, I want the processing mode to be frame, or I want the processing mode to be packet. And then when you attach it to a sender or receiver transform, then the S-frame transform will actually know whether to do its magic on frames or packets. The option B is to add a global parameter to RTC configuration, like for all connections, like for the whole peer connection, use frame level or packet level S-frame, basically. We could have like finer grain, like per transceiver as well. That's another option. Proposal I'm pushing forward is option B. The first reason is that S-frame transform on its own can be used by JavaScript to do S-frame generation or S-frame decryption. And in that case, you're giving blobs and you're receiving blobs. So there's no notion of frame or packet. Also, it's a simple negotiation. What happens if like the sender transform requests frames and the receiver transform requests packets, for instance? Maybe it's okay. We'll see that when the SDP negotiation of S-frame is finalized. Maybe it's not okay. But do we really need that? It seems that we do not need it. And yeah, do we need per transceiver mode selection? So far, I haven't heard of use cases. So that's why I was pushing for option B and clearly not option A. I guess option C is per transceiver as well. Yeah, Anibor?
Yes, I'm not sure if you're expecting questions at the end or here, but I don't. Well, it seems to me that making it a global option is a bit arbitrarily limiting. It would prevent you from, because which mode you pick might depend on which SFU you're talking to, and I think that might, well.
Yeah, but a single peer connection is talking. Yeah. Well, yeah. You can have two different connections. And,
yeah, I have the same thing.
You're talking
like,
about like bundle. Yeah. Harold?
Yeah.
If you want to switch from S-frame to non-encrypted or the other way around for some reason, you will basically want to add new media sections to your call.
Correct.
And that argues actually against having this as a RTC configuration parameter. I think it should be a transceiver parameter. Either S-frame transform or transceiver.
But I mean, the point here, yeah, so the question is really per transceiver or per connection. Will there be two different M sections, one using S-frame per packet and another M section using S-frame per frame? I thought it was not a really compelling use case, but I could see it at the transceiver level if we really want to support that.
Might be, yeah.
I was more worried about the case of one using S-frame per frame and the other one not using S-frame at all.
Oh, but that's different. This is controlled by setting the transform attribute, which is on receiver and sender. So that would be per M section. But whether you're using per packet S-frame flavor or per frame S-frame flavor, we could go either with per connection or per transceiver. I was initially thinking per connection, but whenever is pushing for per transceiver, I guess.
Well, yeah, I don't think RTC configuration is the right place. It sounds like more of a per transceiver thing. I mean, it might be an unfortunate situation if some implementations only implement S-frame and others only implement S-packet. But I think ideally, long term, we want to make sure everyone implements both if there is both. And that seems like the logical level to do this is at the transceiver or the transform. I had a question about, since I'm on the queue, well, since I'm speaking, if you go back to slide, you added an interface for the options object. I don't understand.
Yeah.
What the point of that is.
So the initial proposal was to add the transform type as another parameter to script transform, so that you would do worker, object, transfer array, and then the type itself. By adding an interface there, I believe that the user agent could check whether it's a script transform options, in which case it would do different processing than if it's a regular arbitrary JavaScript object. And that would allow to put the transform type parameter as a second parameter of the constructor.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like that. That's one potential option, but we could bike shed other options there. I feel like we've also talked about adding other types of arguments. The problem is that we have an options object already, but it also serves as a message object to the worker.
Yeah.
Another
exactly, and that's why you can see the constructor of the script transform option is taking an options parameter and a type, and that's only the options parameter that would be sent to the transformer.
Right, but I think there's a more general problem here. We've struggled with this before. I think Harald's proposal for specifying codecs as well also needed an option object. So we basically fumbled on this API where we, there's a couple of options. We can reuse the existing options object and add some caveats, like if you really want worry about backwards compatibility with some of these names, we could specify a new message colon that we say websites have to use from now on. We could add a secondary options object. We could have this interface. So I think we have at least 3 good options there.
So the PR on GitHub is proposing like a 4th parameter after the transfer array. That's the simplest approach.
That might be cleaner.
And it would be an options object. It would be a dictionary.
Yeah.
So that we can.
That would be the logical thing. I think. Yeah. I think.
Okay.
That would. I think my first preference would be to try to wing it with the existing singular object. The second would be an extra object, and the third would be the interface.
Okay.
But
yeah. I'm thinking like. Yeah, well, we can discuss that.
It seems like a detail, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So next slide. Okay, so I guess here there's option C per transceiver, and that seems fine. Next slide. So S-frame transform dual mode. So yeah,
sorry,
you can.
Sorry, you said per transceiver. That I thought per transform probably might be better, or no?
There, it actually depends on how we are doing the SDP negotiation. When I wrote that slide, the idea was that we would add an S-frame A line with per packet or per frame to the M section. And so the M section would say, okay, I'm doing S-frame per packet, or I'm doing S-frame per frame. And in that case, it would be both ways. We need to abide to those things, I guess. That was the simplest approach. But we discussed that and we might be able to just have an use S-frame, and we will not declare in the SDP whether using per frame or per packet. In which case, yes, we could have sender and receiver doing different things.
Question though, if I can do transceiver dot sframe mode equals packet or frame, why can't I? It begs the question why we can't do transceiver dot sframe equals true, right? Why do we have transceiver dot transform equals new script sframe transform object? It just seems a bit lopsided. Like it's simpler to set a sub option than whether you can have sframe or not. But
so you're meaning an option A2 where you're setting the mode dynamically after creation of the sframe transform object?
well, when you're creating the sframe transform object.
Yeah, that's option A, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
Okay, so it seems that we will need to discuss a bit more about option A, B, or C, but it seems option B is not the preferred one. So maybe we will need to focus on option A, sframe transform object, and C per transceiver. I guess it will depend a little bit on the progress made on how SDP will negotiate sframe as well. And we'll make some progress this month on this. Next slide. So sframe transform dual mode. Yeah, so you can use the sframe transform object either to do per packet or per frame. Per frame mode is aligned with the current encoded transform model. So it should be easy to implement if you are implemented WEBRTC encoded transform. The packet mode is not really aligned with current encoded transform mode. It's more like trying to apply sframe after the depacketizer. The proposal is at the ITF level to describe both. And here in this spec, when the packet mode is on, basically we would say that between the encoder and the packetizer, the transform is an identity transform, so you're not changing anything. And there would be a hook somehow in the spec saying that after the packetizer, we apply sframe processing. And this hook would be not exposed to JavaScript. It would be something that allows implementers to implement this mode correctly, basically. And yeah, but because since we have this dual mode, we would have this dual mode at IETF and at WFC level, so we would need to define some things like that in the spec. And finally, the last slide here. Oh, no, not the last slide. So web application should be able to set sframe cipher suite. So you have the sframe transform object, but you have the choice in which sframe flavor you want in the terms of the sframe cipher suite. The sframe spec is defining a fixed set of cipher suites, but really it's the web application itself that will decide it based on either web app specific code, or it could be the MLS integration code, or it could be even SDP integration code. Though currently there's no plan to add cipher suite negotiation in the SDP. Also, the sframe transform can be used either as a sender-receiver transform or by JS directly. So in any case, it makes sense for the sframe transform to be able to set which cipher suite it actually wants. So the proposal here is to add a new parameter to the sframe transform constructor. So the cipher suite is fixed for the lifetime of the sframe transform object. And so there would be a new enum, sframe cipher suite, which would list all the cipher suites currently defined in the sframe specification. I don't know if there are thoughts about that. So there's a PR that is doing it. So is silence? Oh, Yanivar, go ahead.
No, it looks fine to me. No comment otherwise.
Okay, Harold, I see you commented on the PR. Any thoughts about it?
No, not really.
Okay.
I have to read it again to remember what I said.
Okay. So I'm here, no objection here, I guess, on the path forward. And we can look at the PR at an editors meeting. Okay, sounds good. Next slide, 47. I was wondering what happens on the receiver side to our WEBRTC encoded video frame object. So video frame has a type which is empty, key, or delta. When the content is not encrypted, you can inspect the content and know whether the frame is a key frame or a delta frame, and you can expose it. When it's encrypted, we are exposing that information before encryption. We're exposing that information to the script transform that is supposed to do the decryption. So we can rely on RTP header extension, but I don't know what happens if there's no RTP header extension. Or we can rely on the payload format, which would mean that somehow the S-frame packetization should add in the payload type the information that the frame is a key frame or a delta frame. I don't have a strong suggestion here. Peter?
So I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
So this is if somebody had the S-frame transform and then also had a second transform they were doing?
No, that's a case where you don't have an S-frame transform and you're using the script transform to do your decryption.
Okay,
So
but what does
there
that have?
you-
What does that have to do with the S-frame API?
So there it's not the S-frame API, it's the using S-frame on the sender side, and on the receiver side, you're using the script transform to decrypt with S-frame, potentially
Okay.
with S-frame transform object itself.
Okay, so if you decrypt in yourself, you could theoretically look at the payload format and parse it, but what you're saying is somebody might want to decrypt, but then pass the decrypted further down the pipeline, and then have the payload format processed, and then have more processing available later. It doesn't seem like it
no,
makes sense.
It's not really that. It's not really that. It's the script transform on the receiver side is exposing an RTC encoded video frame. The payload content will be encrypted, but there's a type attribute which tells the web application whether it's a key, delta, or empty. And when the content is encrypted and you're trying to decrypt it, then the type attribute might be garbage, or maybe not. So is it important to have it?
I mean, if your job is just to decrypt, you don't need this information and you can't know it anyway, unless
Probably
you
not.
pass on like the dependency descriptor, for example.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand like why, if somebody is just using the script transform in order to do decryption, then they don't need this information. But if they're trying to use script transform to do something else other than decryption, then you're talking about like two different stages of transform.
The type attribute is so you're required to expose a value there. So I guess we could expose empty for S-frame encrypted frames. If we do not have it.
Does empty mean unknown, or does it mean like?
Or we could
there's
use another
something in-
value. We could expose another value. Yeah,
It seems like saying unknown would be the reasonable
we do
thing.
better. Yeah. And so if we have an RTP head extension, then we could expose it.
Yeah, if you know from the
We
dependency
will still
descriptor.
provide unknown, but yeah. Okay.
No, if
That seems
you
to
know
be-
it, you should expose it, I think. But if you don't know it, we should have
Okay.
an unknown value. Same thing
Okay,
for the
that-
other, the spatial index. And
Spatial
temporal
index and topology. So these ones there, the nice thing is they're optional. So if you're using S-frame, then basically they will not be exposed by default, except if you have the RTP header extension. It's not really described in the spec itself now, how you populate spatial index and temporal index, and we should fix that. And I guess relying on RTP header extension for encrypted and relying on the payload format itself when you have like VP9 content seems okay to me. I see Yonivar in the queue.
Yes, I'm still a bit confused on this point. I thought I heard that, so if I'm using S-frame and script transform, on the receiver side, do I get an encrypted frame or do I get a decrypted frame?
You're getting an encrypted frame, and it's up to you as a script transform to decrypt it.
Ah, okay. So that was not my mental model. So I understood this as more of an API problem. That what if I want both S-frame transform, either at the frame level or packet level? Basically, browser handle this for me. In addition, I have a use case to add or remove metadata or something like that. That I am going to use a script transformer from. And these seem like isolated problems to me, and it's more of an API problem than about where do I turn these things on. So, so when you say using script transform to decrypt, that sounds like the old model we have today already, and not with S-frame.
Yeah, if you want to do both S-frame at the frame level and do some manipulation, you can use a script transform. And inside the script transform, you will use an S-frame transform to do the decryption.
But why not have the browser decrypt it for me?
Because you might want. You could do that.
That seems cleaner to me.
Okay, so what you're stating is having a transform that will only take a script transform, and adding a new S-frame attribute to sender and receiver that will only take an S-frame transform object.
But regardless of how we specify it, another one would be to, and I'm not proposing this just for hypothetically for argument's sake. Say we had hypothetically defined sender.transform1, sender.transform2, or sender.transform and sender.S-frame transform, so that you could specify independently whether you want to be able to have JavaScript modify frames, and or whether you want the browser to encrypt things on top at the packetization, depacketization level, either per frame or per packet. That seems orthogonal to me. These seem like the way to break it down. That would support all the use cases, because then you have script transform for the non-encryption use cases preserved with an S-frame, with a browser-driven encryption model that can either be per frame or per packet and work regardless.
Sure, you could do that. I can see the use case where you would do S-frame at the packet level. When you're doing S-frame at the frame level, if you're using script transform already, it seems kind of, to me, it makes sense to be able to use the S-frame transform object itself as part of the script transform. It's way simpler.
What is it that it allows you to do that you couldn't do in what I proposed? Is it just an optimization?
Well, so for instance, depending on, so you have the object and you can apply different algorithms for on the S-frame configuration itself. Because for every frame that you receive encrypted frame, you can inspect it and decide what you want to do by inspecting the content and doing things like that. That you could not do with S-frame transform and then a script transform, for instance. And but in general, I would think that the real thing is really if you have a use case for per packet S-frame and script transform. And in that case, yeah, we should have different APIs. And maybe that's what we should do. But
well, I would approach it the other way and say that, you know, if I have a use case that if I have a non-encryption use case for modifying the payload, which is what this is, the frame payload, then getting that to work with S-frame, regardless of how S-frame is implemented, seems to be I mean, the reasons for picking S-frame per frame or per packet might have to do with which SFU I'm talking to and other external factors, separate from my use case of wanting to modify the frames for metadata. So it seems to not, the default for me would be to not combine, not limit which one can be used.
My response to that is that in that case you can do if we expose like two setters, for instance, you can do the S-frame and modify data either just with the script transform or with setting the two parameters, the two setters. So it's not going to have two ways of doing the same thing, but it might be okay as well.
And I think it would help if we on GitHub we can clarify a little more, because we're mixing. We're talking different models, but we're also talking different APIs, and those are both challenging issues by themselves.
So there's only 5 minutes, and I see Tim on the queue.
Yeah, very quick. Just on this frame type, surely the correct answer is it should be encrypted or S-frame.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I guess there's no RTC encoded audio frame type, or is it?
Yeah. RTC encoded audio frame. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
there's
type.
Okay, there's a type as well.
Type. Frame type. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we don't have.
Yeah.
We can add one.
So we would want like the audio frame to know that it's encrypted, right? Because it seems to make sense as well. So maybe we should not mix empty key or delta. So maybe unknown is better there, and then we might want to say, okay, we have another attribute that says, hey, I'm encrypted, and that would apply to both audio and video frames.
Yep.
Okay, so we only have 4 minutes, and I guess it's time for wrap up. Yeah, Canivar.
Sorry to harp on this, but what is the use case for script transforming an encrypted frame?
Well, it's the current way of doing things. And so I would expect migration. Ideally, I would like application to maybe continue using script transform, but doing the encryption natively. So either using replacing the whole script transform by a S-frame transform, or maybe using the S-frame transform within script transform to at least migrate the decryption and encryption. And that's the migration path I see.
But how would they use S-frame transform within the script transform?
Because S-frame transform is a regular stream transform, so it has a readable or writable, and you can write. You can write on it, and then you can read the encrypted or decrypted content. That's the current model in the spec. We could fully change that as well. But the idea was that S-frame transform would be an object that allows JavaScript to do S-frame generation and S-frame decryption. At least that's...
I'm looking at S-frame transform interface, and you're saying it has a readable, writable. Oh, the transformer.
Yeah. S-frame transform includes generic transform string. So S-frame transform is a generic transform string. You can look at the web IDL.
Yes.
Look for.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
the current
We
model.
should. I'll read up on that.
Yeah. And so this way you can use S-frame transform within script transform very easily. You pipe to basically.
Okay. Thank you. We definitely
Yeah,
have some different models in mind.
I should have given examples, illustrations of code to actually highlight how S-frame transform is supposed to be used currently.
Right.
Okay, it's time for wrap up anyway. So...
Yes, I think we're out of time, so I think we'll continue discussion on the issue on that one, and we'll leave the media capture output for next time. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
I think with that, our next meeting is July 15th. And I guess I hope to see you all there. Did someone take minutes after Dominic dropped? Otherwise, we have a task to look at the transcript. So,
yeah.
But if anyone did, please send them to the chairs, and we'll try to collate the information. All right, thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.